Donald Byrne, only a national master at the time. Titles were a lot harder to come by in those days. The ratings, by the way, are USCF ratings. 2,500 was Byrne's rating at the time. Don Byrne was born on June 12, 1930. He would not become an international master till 1962. He was U.S. Open champion in 1953. He never went any further than IM. He was a professor at Penn State. He died fairly young of lupus on April 8, 1976, at the age of 45. Byrne was C4. Here we have an Anglo-Indian defense. Maybe that's why my mind was on Anglo-Indian on the previous game. Knight C3, Queen's Knight variation, G6, G3, Bishop G7, Bishop G2, Kingside Castle, Pawn D3, Pawn D6, Rook B1. You don't see that move every day, but, right, he wants to move his knight and his bishop, so he's going ahead and getting his rook out of this bishop's line of fire. A5 prevents any ideas of B5 being played at any point. Can't play it really now because of this line here, but E4. Yeah, Knight F3 is a line. It's not the most common, but it is a fairly common line, as is A3 is actually the most common line here. A3 to support the pawn push. But E4, E5, King's Knight E2, Knight C6, White castles, Knight H5. The idea is going to be to push the pawn. Bishop E3, and sure enough, F5. Not liked. Yeah, Knight D4 adds control to F5. Bobby playing F5 right away, figuring he has adequate control. And he really does, doesn't he? After pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. H3 now, controlling the G4 square, threatening a fork. Maybe Queen B3 deserves consideration here. Question mark, huh? This says H3 is best, but not when he played it, it didn't. When he played it, Ficklebot said it was inaccurate. As usual, when I give an alternate line, it calls me a dummy and tells me to play what it just said was inaccurate. Ficklebot. Bishop E6. Well, we've seen that dozens and dozens of times, haven't we, Space Slim, over the years? Coach Daniel coming up with a move, and then the move that was just criticized by Ficklebot is suddenly the best. Or vice versa. All right, so here, Knight D5, Knight D4. Yeah, Queen D7 is pretty thematic. Battery attacking the H-man. Knight D4 is what Bobby played. Knight takes the knight. Take with the bishop. Take with the bishop, because after takes, this square becomes available to your knight. In other words, the idea of taking with the bishop is so that you can play the knight to F4 after takes, right? Here, here, here. And that creates a simultaneous attack against the bishop and against the B-man. Therefore, black would be compelled to retreat his bishop to C8. But now with the A2, G8 diagonal open, white could play bishop to D5 check, forcing king H8. And it just gets really hairy here. Black has to play very exactly, while white has the liberty to take a lot of initiative. Knight E6 compels bishop takes knight. Okay, back. So for that reason, the bot is recommending bishop takes knight rather than knight takes knight. Well, pawn takes the knight and bishop D2. With this file open, we can expect white to put his rook on E1. C6 blunts the diagonal against the bishop with tempo. Knight F4 here. Wow, rook E1. Very interesting. This is undefended, so rook E1 attacks the bishop, and that's going to compel rook E8 to defend. It doesn't like rook E8. Okay. Knight G4, F4 was played. Knight takes knight, and bishop takes knight. Now the battery is finally formed at last. Queen D7. H4, and rook takes the bishop. Double exclam. That's going to bust up the structure on the white king's position. And now rook F8. Rook E1. Rook takes the F-man. Queen D2. Bishop E5. Defending. It says retreat your rook. As I'm curious about rook takes pawn here. That gets a question mark. Oh, he changed it to a check mark. I would suppose white would probably have to go for a rook trade, right? Rook e4, rook takes rook, bishop takes rook. But I do have a passed h-man in this line. So I'm not too dissatisfied with that. Anyway, bishop e5 was played. c5. That's a mistake. He's going to regret giving up control of d5 later on, I'm sure. c5 is, in my mind, ill-advised, as well as in the bot's mind. Yeah, rook e4 really resolves some tension here, and X-ray defends the H-man. And white's ready to double his rooks on the E-file at the right moment. Would have to retreat his rook, but then that gives up this pawn, doesn't it? Instead, c5 was played to the chagrin of the annotator. Just Bader. Well, a lot of people certainly think that, including the inventor of Fischer Random Chess, Bobby Fischer, thought that. I don't know that Fischer Random will ever replace classical chess. I do believe it's certainly the most important variant. In terms of theory and all that, and memorizing moves, all I can say is I had a game against a 2900 player. You guys saw it right here, a 2900 bot that I was able to draw, Archer Queen, simply because I was able to play 23 moves from memory. I didn't have to think for 23 moves. And by the time I was in uncharted territory, we were already in an endgame, and all I had to do was hold the draw. So yeah, at the elite level, I think Fischer Random is certainly a more definite way to determine raw skill from the players. It definitely makes things very interesting. I don't know if it'll ever supplant classical. I would imagine classical and Fischer Random will go on side by side, but you know, we could hope. We could hope that it becomes so popular that it eventually takes the place of regular chess. Because what I love about Fischer Random is that it is regular chess, just with so many more varieties and so many more possibilities. In other words, the essential game of chess has not been altered by Fischer Random. So it's almost not even a variant, to be honest. I definitely think Fischer Random is a great answer to the tedium of memorized openings. All right, where were we? So c5 has been played. Bobby with rook g4 gets the big red X. I did have bishop d5 here in my notes. And the idea of bishop d5 is simply to trade these bishops off and create more exposure on the king. It also gets out of the way of my queen to swoop up here to g4. It would be wrong for white to trade bishops here. That would be a big mistake. Well, maybe not big, but it would be a mistake, right? And with the queen coming here, he'd be compelled to give up his pawn. And black is just winning all day here. So he wouldn't be able to trade bishops. He'd have to play pawn f3 right away to keep in the fight. And even at that, the eval bar favors black fairly strongly here. Because if I'm black, I'm just going to take that pawn. Now it gets a big red X, actually. Now the annotator says rook takes pawn, but I was thinking that would be a mistake. I think it's a mistake to play rook takes pawn here. That gets a... Again, now that gets a big red X, and the bot says, no, play bishop d5. See, the problem here for black is now rook e4 can be played, and that forces a rook trade. Now, there is one pawn grab that might be playable here. What about this one? Because it hits the rook. Can I play bishop takes a2? That looks interesting. See what the bot says. It looks playable. Bot not giving me any credit today. Anyway, rook g4 frowned upon by the annotator. Pawn f3 also frowned. Yeah, rook e4 again. Rook e4 is the optimal move here. We keep coming back to this. X-ray defends the pawn, and black has to make a decision. f3 was Byrne's try, and he goes ahead and takes the h-man. C takes d6, and my preference was going to be queen takes this pawn on a4. A5. I get inaccurate. Oh, it changed it. Gave me a check mark. Although black is still good after, let's say, bishop h2 check. King has to move to one of these squares. Right, c takes d6 was played. Bishop h2 was played. I would think that, can I not just take this right away first? Bishop h2. It gets a star. I don't know. I thought I could play this. Let's see what I get. Yeah, I get a thumbs up. It is playable. And again, if queen takes the pawn, the rook can come to a5, h5 and hit the queen. Queen can throw in a spite check here. King g7. It'd be worth a try for white. Not playable, or at least inferior, I would think, is to take this with the queen. And then, yeah, it gets a big question mark. And surely here, bishop takes the A-man here is got to be wrong because rook takes the bishop. Double exclam! Oh! I got me a double exclam. The reason it gets a double exclam is because it gives up the B rook. Takes. Maybe trap that bishop. All right, let's go back. A lot of speculative moves here. But I did get a double exclam. Bishop h2 right away, gets a star, and king f1. Now king f7 gets an X. The king f7 is surely stronger than queen takes pawn, gets a question mark. Again, any line like this, and queen takes a5. But bishop takes pawn here. Bishop takes pawn. And if you play queen g5, I can play rook f4. Good. King f7 from Bobby. Pawn b4. So the idea of queen f2, obviously, is to attack the rook, forcing rook h5. Don Byrne with b4. a4. Now queen f2. g5 defends. Rook e4 at last. Rook takes the rook. Question mark. Really, rook h6. To me, this is much more active move. I guess the bot doesn't like it because white's taking back with check, but then I can just play king g6, and I'm safe and sound. Oh, that is what was played, but not king g6. He played king e8. Which gets a question mark, right? The idea of king g6, first of all, the king's just much more active, and it keeps this queen from coming to f6. Now, he can take your pawn, right? And then you just trade queens. Yeah, it might not be the easiest endgame to play, being an exchange down. Let's go back. King e8, and here he played queen takes the pawn, threatening queen h8. So e5 is a cute move, isn't it? That keeps tension on the board, and it protects the D-man, and it cannot be taken. It's a poisoned pawn, this guy, because if you take, the rook comes over for the skewer. So you'd have to play bishop f4. Excuse me, that works too. You'd have to play bishop. No, I guess I should have stuck with my original. This is better. Bishop f5. Anyway, e5, cute move. Queen takes d4. Queen takes d6, right? So queen f7 check being signaled. And of course, that gives the queen access to f4. But that's a hard move to play with all these pawns marching down the center here. So queen takes the pawn. Queen takes the queen. Bishop takes the queen. And we have two bishops against a rook and a bishop. So black does have two passed pawns. But how to make them good, right? Don Byrne secures these two pawns. e5 again. This is, again, so cute. The point of e5, of course, is you cannot capture for the same reason as before. That's a skewer. So e5 again. Wow. Would have been a cute move. a3, bishop e5, bishop f3, blockading, king e2 being called for. I was actually curious about b5. That's a mistake, apparently. My idea, obviously, is to try to break things up here and get in here. King e2 being called for. g4 hits the bishop, bishop d1, b5 defends. Why is that getting a question mark? It cements his pawns in place, securing everything on the queen's side. I don't, this is beyond my level to understand why that would get a question mark. Rook c1 hits the backward pawn. I thought bishop e2 might be an interesting move here because I got an exclam and then got downgraded. Anyway, rook c1, king d7, rook c2, right? d4, I started to say d4 is the same thing as b4. Not b4, but b4. Not b4, but b4. There's a little trick here. Can you see the trick? If I take this pawn, what is white's move? Now, look at this piece relationship here, and that should tell you white's move. You tell me. Obviously, white should skewer. He should play rook to d1 and skewer or pin the bishop to the king, right? You say, but coach, that's an illegal move. And an ill eagle is a sick bird. So how do I make it legal? Well, I take that pawn. And when you take me, or if you take me, I'm getting my material back with the interest of the pawn. All right, coming back. So rook c2 was played, but d4 would have been lovely. King d6, now rook d2, king f2, being called for. Bishop f4 hits the rook, so rook back to c2. Pawn g3, not liked. The bot calling here. What about h5 here, though? Just solidify this. No, says it's sticking to its guns. I was thinking play h5, and you can always play the bishop b3 later. Anyway, g3 from Bobby, bishop f3, bishop e5, king g2. So these pawns are now blockaded. Bishop b3 here, rook c5. Bishop f7, pawn d4 here. Bishop takes the pawn. e5 check. Oh, that's a sweet discovered attack right there. Bishop takes the pawn. Rook takes the pawn. Check. King e7. Rook back to c5. Bishop b2. Rook takes the b man. Bishop takes the a man. Rook b7 check. King f6. And rook takes the bishop. He took the bishop, offered the draw. The draw was accepted. Because you have opposite colored bishops, it is a dead draw. These pawns being blockaded, even though black has 2 extra pawns, there's no way to convert any of them. First of all, my king cares for the king side, so my bishop's going to come in, clean up this pawn on the queen side. And there's no way to make progress. You just leave your king here, right? He can never advance. And then you put your bishop back on the long diagonal. So let's say h5. Really, if h5, I just take the pawn, so I can't do that. So yeah, let's say I defend the pawn. Let's do that. I'm going to play bishop to d7, and then I'm just going to stay on this diagonal and just go back and forth. The pawns are blockaded. There's no way to get my king to move. Okay, so that's how you draw that. Really nice game between Don Byrne and Bobby Fischer.